Everybody would agree that Bojack Horseman has some of the most visually interesting and charming animation styles out there. Honestly, the writing and amount of care that went into every single frame of this show is incredible. You can stop the show at any moment and find out so much about the character and situation that they are in just from the background alone. Lisa Hannibal, the creative director of the show, put a lot of her zany energy into the backgrounds of the show. Honestly, without her, a lot of the visual appeal would have been completely lost. She sprinkled a ton of art references throughout the show. You will see artworks hanging on the wall, and in 99% of cases, they are referencing a real life painting. But you know how every painting carries a story with it? Maybe it got stolen, and that's the sole reason why it is famous. Like, for example, Mona Lisa is basically only famous because it got stolen. And a lot of these stories Lisa Hannibal has woven into Bojack Horseman. So you get this story within the story whenever you look at the scenery or a room decoration in the set of Bojack Horseman. Nothing is there accidentally, and everything has a meaning. Maybe they describe the way character felt at the moment. Maybe it is to draw a parallel to a real life moment, or maybe it's just a visual gag for the laughs. Let's start with the painting depicting the main character himself.
You can see from the teeny tiny brushstrokes that this is very expensive.
This is a reference to a David Hockney's painting Pool with Two Figures. Hockney first visited California in 1964 and was immediately fascinated by the vibrancy of Los Angeles and Hollywood culture. That was his first encounter with modernist architecture, like the Bailey House of the famous case study house program. Like, I could talk about this program for an hour, non-stop. They literally defined the LA house with a pool trope. Look at this picture. That is from the case study house program. It was also there where he got into a magazine called Physique Pictorial, which as an openly gay man had no trouble getting into. At the time of painting this piece, he had just gotten out of a relationship with Peter Schlesinger, the man depicted in the photo. The breakup hit him especially hard, and by showing another young man swimming towards Peter, he acknowledges lost love for his partner and a desire for a new relationship. Don't forget that the show literally begins with the breakup between Princess Caroline and Bojack. When you look at his other work, you get this overwhelming sense of whimsy and fun, but when you look at this painting in particular, you just get a deep sense of emptiness. You could also say that because the person in the picture is Bojack himself, looking down on himself, you can maybe read this as a reference to the Narcissus painting by Caravaggio, because he's also in love with himself and doomed to drown in his own reflection.
See those tar pits? Hollywood's a real pretty town that's smack on top of all that black tar. By the time you realize you're sinking, it's too late.
But then again, you see him giving the painting as a present to Princess Caroline, which can be read as his longing for an intimate relationship which could never be, because he's still a selfish and narcissistic man. Do you see how deep you can go with the symbolism in this show? Nothing is there incidentally. We can also spot a painting by Henri Matisse, the Fauvist color palette, Fauve meaning beast in French. Get it? It is also associated with conveying the feeling of emotional liberation and hedonism, which is a really PG-friendly way of describing the utter nonsense happening at Bojack's house. And if you needed more context about who Bojack is, just look at what is over his bed. That is the interpretation of the famous painting by Andy Warhol. This painting was made to illustrate a person whose life is defined by consumer culture. Andy Warhol wanted to hammer home this point by using silk screening to create endless repetitions of the image. The sheer monotony of repeated images strip them of originality, pointing out how the consumer market homogenizes products and people into endless identical commodities. And by the nature of the technique for the production, the print gets worse and worse the more copies you make. A perfect way to summarize Bojack's headspace at the beginning of the show, and Hollywood culture in general. Paintings, much like the opening sequence of the show, change with the narrative. That's how we get the painting of Keith Haring, a graffiti artist active during the 80s. His work is extremely critical and provocative. You've probably seen his most famous work, Silence Equals Death, a direct direct criticism of the government's and society's silence and apathy towards the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s. Those years were marked by widespread homophobia, and Herring stood out as one of the most outspoken critics. This episode, by the way, is also where we find out that Bojack's best friend, Herb Kazaz, is gay. Speaking of Herb Kazaz, in his office we can see pictures of Herring's real-life friend, Jean-Michel Basquiat, whose work was also deeply political, focusing on the battle against the systematic racism, which, in the context of the show, symbolizes the relationship between two friends. Man, I just can't get over how extra this show goes in those little background details. Often they are just blink it and you will miss it visual gags, like this funny reference to the work of Damien Hirst, the physical impossibility of death in the mind of someone living. I guess in the context of this world, it's like a strange form of body art or a performance. By the way, in real life, the shark rotted from inside out and they had to replace it. Take from that what you will. Or like this scene, which is funny because Wallace is obsessed with buying Mark Rothko paintings, which are famously ridiculously expensive. The average price of one is $5 million, and most go way over. For example, his number 10 fetched $82.9 million at Christie's auction house in New York. Only in this shot there is like $100 million in paintings alone. By the way, that first painting from David Hockney is like $90 million worth. Just goes to show the ridiculous amount of wealth these characters have. Lisa Hannawald's choice of paintings also helps us to understand the headspace of characters, or at least the headspace that they are trying to be in. For example, when Bojack was out on a run trying to manifest his inner change, we see a painting by Franz Marc, one of my personal favorites. He belonged to this group, the Blue Riders, founded by him and Kandinsky. They used color, simple composition, and form to return to the true essence of art, which is like the sentence you can use to describe basically every avant-garde group that appeared in the 20th century. Everybody thought that their approach was the only right one. We need a new shift in paradigm, and our way is the only way for the future. And the guys before us had no idea what they were doing. But I like Franz Marc, so I'm on his side. Look at this dog painting. His paintings have a deep therapeutic sense when you look at them, which is exactly what Bojack wants now. Keep all the sadness neatly contained in a nice circle and never let it out. Problem solved. The problem was, in fact, not solved, but it leads us nicely into his stay at Malibu Rehab Center, which is where we get introduced to this portrait by Vincent van Gogh. Much like Bojack, Vincent was self-admitted into St. Remy's Asylum after a severe mental health crisis in December of 1888, which included the self-mutilation of his ear. The calm and serene atmosphere of the former monastery, staffed by nuns and nurses, helped him continue an incredibly productive artistic period. They believed that fresh air, nature, and a calming environment could help troubled minds. Vincent's brother, Theo, was a constant source of emotional and financial support. He encouraged Vincent to pursue art seriously and provided him with a monthly allowance so he could focus entirely on his craft. This is probably one of the last paintings he created before he died. A small tangent. You know those artists that draw incredibly detailed drawings of people and animals in graphite? Honestly, I never understood why people like them and why people buy them. In the end, you get something you already had, and if you just put the same picture that you had through Photoshop, you would basically have the same result. Like, I couldn't understand why someone would do this until my art professor said that the time that went into them is kind of the point. It is the process and the joy of creating that matters more than the finished result. That is like the whole point of art therapy, which really made me gain a whole new respect for this medium. Moving on to Sarah Lynn's house. And here, basically only two paintings are enough for us to know who she is and how her story will inevitably end. This painting, The Birthday by Marc Chagall, who is known for paintings that defy gravity. Almost like you were on a trip when you were licking these strange looking stickers. And wouldn't you know it, the painting itself is made entirely of that stuff. But not only that, it was painted by Chagall in 1915, just a few weeks before he and his wife Bella got married. The painting is a wonderful expression of the amazing, flowing, and powerful love that these two shared. So you have this wonderful image full of life, which is being distorted and twisted into something dark and tragic. And then you have Ophelia's Death by John Evert. For those of you who don't remember, Ophelia's death in Shakespeare's play Hamlet is shrouded in mystery. The play leaves the exact circumstances of her death ambiguous, whether it was an accident or intentional. A branch of the willow tree broke, sending Ophelia into the waters below. Her heavy clothes held her up for a time, and she floated along the brook, singing mournfully, as one incapable of her own distress. Eventually, her waterlogged clothes pulled her to muddy death. The inclusion of this painting adds a twisted and chilling form of foreshadowing in the show. It adds another layer to an already tragic story. A similar thing happens when all assistants across Hollywood quit their jobs and form a union. They eventually enter negotiations with Lanny and Princess Caroline. During this scene, a turtle-themed parody of Revolt in Cairo can be seen hanging on the wall. The original painting portrays a violent uprising during Napoleon's conquest of Egypt, when the people of Cairo rebelled against the French. A revolt that ended in a massacre, leaving between 5,000 and 6,000 dead or wounded. You can feel the tension choking you through the screen when you watch it for the first time. Speaking of choking, let's explore what's inside Yolanda Buenaventura's family house. Here we find Robert Mapplethorpe's painting of Joe Rubberman, which sounds like a kinky name for Mr. Fantastic. Robert was an American photographer known for his powerful, provocative, and technically masterful black and white still lifes and nude studies. In the late 1970s, Robert began documenting New York's sadomasochistic subculture. The resulting images, even today, are highly controversial for their explicit nature, but are also praised for their technical mastery and respectful yet unflinching portrayal of the subculture. After his death, a touring retrospective of his work, The Perfect Moment, became the center of national debate about obscenity and public funding for the arts. When the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. canceled the exhibition due to the pressure from the conservative parties, leading to a full-on culture war. Then we see The Flower by Georgia O'Keeffe. O'Keeffe's flowers are suspected of representing female genitalia. On the bookshelf, while mother and daughter are arguing, we can see Pauline Bonaparte as Venus Victrix by Antonio Canova. He was commissioned by Pauline Bonaparte's husband, Camillo Borghese, to execute this beautiful female form reclining on a couch in Rome. Canova was first instructed to depict Pauline fully clothed as the goddess Diana, but Pauline herself insisted on Venus. She had a reputation for promiscuity and may have enjoyed the controversy behind the sculpture, which draws a perfect parallel to Yolanda's family. Another interesting artifact is on this bookcase, a Paleolithic Venus figurine, created between 35,000 and 21,000 BCE. Most of them have small heads, wide hips, and legs that taper to a point, and are suspected to have represented some sort of a fertility charm. These columns can also be seen as a reference to ancient Egyptian architecture, but of a more suggestive form. But yeah, I can go on and on listing every single art reference in the show, but that is not the point. And I wanted to highlight the massive power of its visual storytelling. Digging into these background stories just adds a whole new level of enjoyment to an already beautiful show. So anyways, that is it for this video. If you liked it, please express your opinion in the comments section. Like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. Thank you. Bye.